You're live.
Hey y'all, I'm James Wright, and welcome to the shop. We're going to have a fun time tonight because we're going to be talking about chisels. So that means this is going to be a very sharp video.
Or a rather dull topic, I don't
It depends on which one. So yes, this is going to be a fun time. If you are new to the Wood by Wright second channel, I do a live video on this channel every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central Time, where we usually pick a different topic and we go through it. Next week is going to be a little bit different because we're actually going to be doing a talk for a local tool club. And so we're going to be doing that up a little bit differently, but we'll be talking about hand planes next week. If you are watching this live, throw questions in the chat, and my wife will try and collect them and collate them, and we'll get to as many as we can. We can't always get to all the questions. So unless someone throws up a super chat, we'll try and get to as many of them as we can. If you're watching this recorded, then down below you'll see a list of all the questions with a timestamp that gets you relatively close to where it is in the video, as well as the timeline down below. You can actually see and pick the spot. So if you like that, let me know. But we're going to have a good time tonight. Things coming up. I spent some money and fixed a few things with the audio system, so I'm hoping the audio is a little bit better tonight. My mixer was dying and I had to replace a couple other things. So hopefully it is a little bit better because we've been having issues with that. So if it is, let us know. And I think that's about it. Is there anything specific I need to talk about? There's no bench update.
Oh, never mind. It's your screen dying. It's just on our
Yeah, I need to replace my
I was like, why is it not green?
That's what I get for buying the cheap one. But yeah. Yeah, I think that's about it. So let's actually dive into some chisels here. To start with, I'm going to actually go through different types. I'm going to categorize a few different things and talk through what are some of the differences, what makes one a bench chisel as opposed to a dovetail chisel as opposed to a carving chisel, bevel angles and things like that. I'm not really going to get into sharpening because I have a ton of videos on sharpening. If you want to see those, just type in Wood by Wright sharpening into YouTube search, and you will come up against 20, 30 videos. You put up any particular one, and you'll see a copy of that. Actually, I think I have 2 lives where we did a series of sharpening everything. So I went through pretty much every tool at one point or another. I think I have a video on every specific tool, but I'll probably be putting more of those in the future. So let's start with the standard bench chisel. A bench chisel is a chisel that lives on your bench, thus the bench chisel. Is that a little too clean? Yeah, it is a little bit too bright. Let me bump the ISO down a little bit on this. Come on, let me move it. Other way.
Our children are yelling in the background.
Sorry. So a bench chisel is out of focus. A bench chisel is a very simple chisel, and this is one from Narix. This is their basic line. And what it is it's relatively thin, around an 1/8 inch or so. Generally, they taper out and they get a little bit thicker as they come back this way. The measurement is the width on the back up at the tip, not back here, because some of them do actually get thinner as they come back here. The most tend to have a regular measurement at least halfway down the shank. But most bench chisels have a flat spot on the side. Not a huge flat spot, but it's generally flat. And then you'll have a tapered side bevel that comes down towards that flat spot. A bench chisel is kind of that halfway between a really beefy, heavy chisel. It is something that you can whack on without fear of it bending, but it's not something really detailed for getting those tight corners. Some people like to have what is now being called a dovetail chisel, where rather than having a flat side, it comes down to a tight corner. This is one of my Narix chisels, and the side comes down to almost an exact point. I like the Narix that has been polished off, so there really isn't a side to it, but it doesn't actually come to a sharp corner here. So this allows you to get into any dovetail. If you really look at it, it's about a 1/64 of an inch flat side on here. But that's plenty enough that you can get all the way into a corner of a dovetail to get into the details. So if your sidewall is leaning over, it allows you to get that corner of the chisel right up into the corner of what you're working in. But I generally use these as my bench chisel, though some people think, oh no, bevel comes all the way down to the bottom, it's only for dovetails. Kind of schmoo. Yeah, you'll probably hear the kids because apparently they are restless.
Well, if you would let a certain child have a certain electronic, they'd be silent. Just saying.
Wow, I got some schmoo on this bench. I got to flatten again. So you've got bench chisels, dovetail chisels. Generally now, if you see a new tool labeled as a dovetail chisel, it's a bench chisel just where the sides come down to a corner. Then you have mortising chisels, and mortising chisels generally are taller than they are wide. So here is a mortising chisel. Some people will refer to them as a pig sticker, but it's actually, this is the width, this is a 1/4 inch, but you can see it is taller than its cutting width. And that gives it a very, very stiff frame. So I can whale on this all day long. I can lever out chips. Because it is taller than it is wide, when I lever it, I actually have some strength behind it, and I'm not going to worry about bending it. With bench chisels, if you're levering things out, you be careful with it. Don't put a lot of pressure on it because you can actually bend this out. You'll find a lot of old chisels that have a belly on their flat because people have been prying with them, or they'll have a concavity if they've been prying the other way. So yeah, you generally don't want to pry on these. That's why the mortising chisels have a very large size. Now, mortising chisels, you generally get them in a set of whatever. And I normally tell people, don't buy sets of mortising chisels. You're probably never going to need them all. You generally need a 1/4 inch, maybe a 3/8. Depends on what sizes you're doing. Maybe a 1/2 inch, but generally you buy the chisel that you need for the shape. And if you buy 3 mortising chisels, it's going to be the same price or more than buying the whole set. The same price to, a little bit more, depending upon what you get. So generally, with mortising chisels, don't buy the set. Just get the 1 or 2 that you need. Is that a super chat?
It is a super chat.
Alan, thank you, man.
I'm stocking the vacation fund.
This week it's fixing the audio fund.
Heck no.
What?
It's
sorry, it's for Sarah.
Mom Nomeo. Thank you.
What's the mom joke?
Okay, hang on.
And for those of you who knew,
I got a new one.
The super chats all get a joke from Sarah, and some of them are good, and some of them are mom jokes. Wow, laser beams coming out of those eyes. That glare is powerful.
Well, that was a record for digging a grave. I forgot we actually built dog house. I'm really tired tonight. I had to be at work early. What am I looking for?
Mom joke. I'll come back to it in a minute. I'm going to hit the next time. Okay.
James got really mad at me the other day for having a terrible sense of directions. So I packed up my suitcase and went right. Forgot I shouldn't have put the word went in there. Oh well, and left. It's going to be a long night, folks. I have my blankie. I'm just going to hide.
Yes.
I can't even tell my jokes correctly. It's so sad. I'm so sad. Sorry, Alan. Wake up, Sarah.
I still love you,
I know. I'm tired. I gotta get, okay. I was looking for some good ones. All right. I gotta.
So, back to the chisels. There are 2 main types of chisels, and most of them fit into that. And that is a tang chisel. Like most of mine here, actually the steel of the handle goes up inside of the wood. And there's a tang that goes up through the wood. And so what you would actually have is this piece of steel goes up and it extends up to somewhere around here. Actually right up through the middle. Actually, I think I have a broken one. Yes, I do have a broken. Yes, I do. Okay, good. This one, I did unspeakable things to this one. But you can see the tang actually comes up that far into the wood. And so there's a tang that is inside and usually has a ferrule then holding the wood together so it doesn't break. But I did things to that one. The other one is a socket chisel, and I don't have many socket chisels because I don't like socket chisels, which is a very personal thing. A lot of people absolutely love them, but for me, they just the benefit to a socket chisel is you can switch the handle out easily. And there's a few other benefits, but that's the big one that people tout is if I want a different handle in there, I can switch it out. But I've never wanted to switch out a handle, so I don't really want to. But yeah, there's a lot of other reasons. But a socket chisel doesn't have a ferrule. The actual steel has a hole in it. And this is one of my slicks, but you can see how it's shaped like that. And so you can actually, let's see, this one is also a socket chisel.
Wait. I don't know. Can you make it a tad bit more
Focused?
Aha.
Is that better?
Yes.
So this is also a socket chisel. So the wood goes into the socket and it acts as the ferrule holding it together. And the handle slides in, and with a good wrap and tap on it, it'll lock it in place so it doesn't come out. And I can actually hold it by the wood most of the time. Every now and then it comes loose. But it's really nice because if I want to, I can break it out. Actually, this one's in pretty good. There you go. And I could put in a different handle. So some people actually have a full set of handles that they can put different ones on. This is a slick. Isn't that slick? Slicker than snot on a doorknob. This is actually, I thought it was a 2.5 inch. I measured it. It's a 3 1/8 inch slick. This thing is massive. This is more for timber framing, so you don't generally use this in woodworking. But every now and then you gotta have a slick. This particular one was actually made from a baseball bat. Previous owner needed a handle and had a bat, so there you go. Slicks are generally referred to chisels that are, that the steel is as long as a regular chisel, and they tend to have a very wide body. But you can get slicks that are long and large like this, but still only have like an inch, 1.5 inch size blade. The most slicks are around 2 inches or more. Any questions so far?
Yes. Let's see. Aaron Fenn asked, I realize you have a chisel spreadsheet. I didn't see IBC. Have you tested them?
No, I wasn't able to get an IBC. There's a bunch of others, like the, I had someone asking me why I tested a, I don't remember which one it was, but I tested the dovetail rather than the regular bench chisel. And there's a few other things like that. There's a lot of other chisels out there I would love to test, but I can only get so many. For the chisel test, I actually was loaned most of them, so I was able to save a little bit from that. But yeah, I still bought quite a few of them. Hey, Tom! Thanks for the super chat. What do you have?
We missed Tom and Alan last week. Okay, I missed Tom and Alan, so.
Woohoo! Oh, okay, here's what I miss.
A terrible joke by my part, so not much.
Yeah. So here's another. Oh, you have a mom joke ready?
I do.
Okay, what is it?
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What do you call a bee that comes from America?
What?
A USB.
Yep.
Oh, you just. Yeah.
I love you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, another
I'd like
type.
to see you get up at 5:30 in the morning and then come down here and tell jokes and not be asleep. Thank you very much.
I love you, babe.
Yeah, uh-huh. For a whole. I get more money from them than for you.
Truth. So a couple other types of chisels that come up. This is a fishtail chisel. Historically, you'll often see these referred to as dovetail chisels because they would often be used for doing half-blind, full-blind dovetails because it comes to a point and tapers off. So if on a half-blind dovetail, I can get right up into that corner and I can really get out and clean out the pins. So this really comes in very useful. I actually have a video showing making this one. I had a friend in Europe that forged this Damascus steel for it, one of my absolute favorites. It fits in with the live oak. I love this chisel. But a fishtail chisel, there really aren't a whole lot of uses other than half-blind and full-blind dovetails. But when you do need those, this comes incredibly handy, and a good fishtail chisel will save you. You don't need a set of them, you just need one. Like a 1/2 inch is all you need. You're not going to use it that much unless you do a lot of dovetails. But if you do, it's a very useful chisel. Other chisels you're going to see, I don't have, actually, do I have? No, I don't have that paring chisel. A paring chisel is kind of like a bench chisel, except for it tends to have a much longer shank. Most bench chisels are somewhere around 3 or 4 inches in length. A paring chisel often is like 6 or 8 inches in length, and the blade itself. And that is for paring. You can actually get down on the surface of the wood and pare in a long distance in before the handle hits the wood. And that makes it very, very useful for reaching into things. Also, paring chisels tend to have a slightly lower angle that gives them a much keener cut as they cut into the wood deeper in. But a paring chisel tends to be very delicate because it has that long nose on it. It's not something you're going to be whaling on. It's not something you're pounding on. It's something you just use with your hand to pare out material. Before I get onto it, there's one other type. You have the tangs and sockets, and then you have the Stanley Everlasting style, and this is both a tang and a socket. It looks like a socket because there is no ferrule. It goes into this, but it's actually the steel of the blade actually goes all the way up through into the middle, and this cap is the same piece of steel. So it has this socket on here as well as the tang. It's kind of the best of both worlds, and a lot of people absolutely love these. They feel really good in the hand. They're a little bit short for my like, so I don't use it that much, but it is a really fun chisel, and there's kind of a bit of a there's a cult following to them, as it's something that a lot of people really like, and collecting on these are different types. There's also a leather washer that actually will absorb the feeling when you're holding it. So it's a very, very interesting chisel, and if it were a little bit longer, I'd absolutely love it, but it's just not quite the feel I want. Got another question before I jump into the next thing?
Let's see. Scott Swineford asks, why are up or incanel gouges so uncommon? They are incredibly useful to me.
Incanel gouges, and I'll be talking about those more when I get into the carving. Incanel gouges they don't have a lot of specific uses. With the caveat, if you came from a power tool background, having it with the bevel up in use is very appealing, because your thrust is in line with the cut. And that's something I have a whole video talking about bevel up, bevel down. Actually, Paul Sellers did a video about bevel up, bevel down. Great talk on that. It just came out this week. But yeah, it's kind of a mindset thing. There aren't a lot of incanel gouges because for someone who's strictly hand tools, there aren't a lot of uses that an incanel gouge can do that an outcanel, a standard outside bevel gouge, can do. If you can do it with an outside bevel gouge, you can do it with an inside bevel gouge. But there are things that you can do with an outside bevel that you cannot do with an inside bevel. So having a bevel on the outside is far more useful in more places than having it on the inside. The only time we're having it on the inside is when you want to pare. You want to reference a surface going in. But it's very rare that you're referencing a rounded surface. So having an in-canal gouge has very few uses that an out-canal gouge can't do. And so that's why in history, there were very few of them other than in pattern makers. And pattern makers those were like the samurai woodworkers of their day. They were the people who made the patterns that would then be cast. So anytime you saw something that is cast, a cast piece of wood, a cast piece of metal, or the flywheels, there was a guy who made that pattern all by hand. And some of the organic shapes, carving these large things that would be cast, and carving them actually slightly larger than they would need because everything shrinks, and shrinks in different places in different ways. An incredible skill. So if you ever hear about pattern makers or pattern makers' vices, things like that, they were the people who made patterns for casting. A little side note. So let's actually jump in from bench and joinery chisels into carving chisels. One of the big differences between them is the angle you sharpen them at. Most of my bench chisels, most everything I have here is sharpened at 35 degrees. 35 degrees is that perfect balance from sharpness and actual function to durability. The lower you make that angle, the less durable it is. The more chance you're going to dull it out quickly, you're going to chip something. The higher you make that angle, it's going to be more durable, but the higher you make it, the more pressure you have to put on it to cut. So most of my bench chisels are around 30 to 35 degrees. with a few exceptions of paring chisels. Those are down around 25. The fishtail chisels down around 25. Anything I'm going to be delicate with. My mortising chisels I actually do at 35 as well, because they're a brute force tool. You're going to be pounding on it. You want an edge that will withstand it. Is that a super chat from Gary?
Yes.
Hey, thank you, man. What do you say?
Says, hi, James and Sarah. Love your YouTube channel. Watch it all the time. Thanks, Gary. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, man.
I think that's one of your first times comment. I don't recognize your tagline.
Good to see you on here, man.
Mm-hmm.
See, what's his mom joke?
Ready? When James told me to stop impersonating a flamingo, I had to put my foot down.
A flaming goat?
Flamingo. Did it not come out?
Flamingo.
Flamingo.
I'm like, a flaming goat? I had to put my foot down?
Well, you know, and of all trades, a flaming goat. That would be funny.
Flamingo. Okay, that makes more sense.
Flamingos.
Okay, so back to this. So most of my bench chisels are around 30 to 35 degrees, but most of my carving tools are actually down around 20 to 25 degrees. That lower angle means they're going to dull much faster, but it means they're going to be much more keen and they slide through the work with less force. And that's very important with a carving tool, because with a carving tool, I'm actually doing a lot where I'm just pushing on it. And I want to have a lot more control. So having that lower angle gives me far more control. That's one of the big differences between carving chisels and bench chisels, because there are a lot of carving chisels that look like bench chisels. I mean, if you just look at these, they're relatively same. They both come to a straight edge, but this one's a carving chisel because it's got that lower angle bevel on here. Let me see if I can actually zoom in and show you. So you can see the bevel on this one is a lot longer. Oops. The bevel on this one is a lot longer, even though the steel on this is thinner. This is down at like 25 degrees, whereas this one's up at 35 degrees. So carving chisels basically come in 5 different categories. And you can have other people who break that up. You have your straight chisels, just like your bench chisels. There aren't many of these. Usually you're going to have 2 or 3 of these. But in general, you can use the bench chisel in place of this, so you don't have to buy this for carving. Then you have your skewed chisels. And the skewed chisels are like a straight, but it doesn't come to a straight point. It is skewed. And a lot of them are actually double bevel. There's a bevel on both sides. Though you can get single bevel skewed chisels. These allow you to get into corners, much like you would with a fishtail. But these are great for doing your chip carving and slips like that. Cutting out your lines. These are very, very useful. Having a small one like this, I love that. Then next, you have V-tools. V-tools are shaped like a V. But the thing about this is it's actually not really a full V. There's a small rounded gouge at the bottom. And this doesn't come to a point. It actually comes to a small round on the bottom. And so you have to remember that when sharpening it. You sharpen one side, you sharpen the other side, but then you also have to sharpen that rounded bottom. So don't think of it as a straight V. Then the next thing we have is, where'd my veiners go? Here. We have a veiner. We're getting close to a gouge. It's rounded on the bottom, but it has 2 sides that come up that are straight. So this side and this side are straight. It's not a perfect round all the way around. So this doesn't make a circle. It's like the end of a U. That shape is referred to as a veiner. For carving out veins, I guess. And then you have gouges. And gouges are a round. They actually are a portion of a radius. So if you were to actually shape this all the way around, it could make a circle. It doesn't make an oval. So gouges are by far the most common because they come in different types. You can get different radiuses, and you get different sweeps so that there's a different amount of that radius, not radius, what's the word I'm looking for? A section of a circle.
Or wait.
I can't remember what it is.
What are you? Like an arc?
What's that?
An arc?
An arc. Yes, an arc of the circle. Yes.
I wasn't even paying attention.
But gouges then come in a bunch of different types. So you have your spoon gouges and you have bent gouges. You have fishtail gouges that splay out on the end, so they're shaped kind of like this, except for they're then rounded as well. And I'm going to refocus again. And so you'll get gouges in every stripe of the window. They'll get bent in, they'll get bent out, they'll get splayed on the end. They'll have different arcs. They'll have different widths on them. They're all over the place. You can even get skewed gouges where the edge is at a different angle. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of shapes to gouges. Now, when you do V-tools, you basically have two different things. You can get the angle of the V, so usually around 60 degrees is what most people use. And then you can have how tall are the legs on those. So there's only a certain amount of those that you get. With the skews, you have double bevel or single bevel, and then you have, how wide is it and possibly what angle. So there's a limited amount of those. With the straight chisels, there's only a certain amount of straight chisels. How wide do you want them? So you only need 2 or 3 of those. With veiners, you generally only need 2 or 3 of them. It's rare to need more than that. The veiners are basically a wide V-tool where the sides come up almost parallel. But then you get into gouges, and there are hundreds of types of gouges. So usually when I tell people, when someone asks me what set of carving tools should I get, I generally say don't get a set of them. Maybe buy a small set of 4 to 6 that have a straight, a bevel, a V-tool, and 1 or 2 gouges. That is a great starter set, and you can do 90% of your carving with just those. And then from that point on, buy individual chisels. Don't buy sets, because you're going to have a project where, I really need that particular chisel for this project. Because if I get a set of gouges, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of gouges out there. The chance that I'm going to get the 3 or 4 gouges that I'm going to need in the future are so minuscule that it's just not worth jumping for. So get the basic set of a couple things that you need, and then buy your individual chisels for the particular uses. Don't buy all of them. As to companies, when it comes to carving chisels, I like File and Two Cherries. Two Cherries tends to be a little bit cheaper, but functionally they work just as well. Both of them come sharp and ready to go. You might want to strop them, but they're keen and ready to work. With a carving chisel, you should never have to take this back to the stone and resharpen it. You should always just take it on the strop. Every 5 to 10 minutes or so, strop the chisel and keep it sharp. If you let it get dull, then you have to take it back. If you drop it on the floor and you chip it, then you're going to have to take it back. But as long as you take care of it and you strop it regularly, you'll never have to sharpen this again. And so that's what I try to do with them, unless I drop them on the floor. So what questions we got?
Let's see.
28. Yeah, I'm going to start transitioning to questions here.
We talked about... Did you, Matt Tomon asked, what's a slick for? I don't remember if you actually specifically answered that question.
I will answer that. Generally, this is just for timber framing. So for general carpentry and woodworking, this isn't needed. But if you're doing timber framing, where you're making a mortise that's 6 inches by 3 inches, you don't want to do that with an 1.5 inch chisel, especially when you're timber framing and the mortise might be 10, 12 inches deep. That's not going to reach 10, 12 inches. You need something that can reach 10, 12 plus inches. And so this is for really big timber framing joints. I've really only needed to use this once or twice, and that's been on timber framing projects, making the pergola, making the my mailbox post. There's very few reasons that a slick is needed. Let me touch on the question I mentioned earlier, incanel versus outcanel. Actually, let me see if I have an outcanel here, an incanel. I don't have an incanel. It's in my other roll. I don't use incanel gouges very often because there are very few things that an incanel gouge can do that an outcanel gouge can't do. So this is the standard gouge. This is what most every gouge is like. It has the bevel on the outside of the curve. If it's an incanel gouge, the curve, the bevel, goes on the inside. And the nice thing about that is if the curve were on the inside, I can then use the outside as a reference surface. So I can use that to pare out something at this radius. And this kind of brings us to the hand tool mindset versus the power tool mindset. When you look at a chisel, a standard bench chisel, if you were raised on just power tools and you pick up a bench chisel, you're almost always using it with the bevel up. And that makes logical sense because if you're pushing it with the bevel up, then you're pushing it in line with where you're cutting it. But if you're pushing it with the bevel down, now the chisel's up here, well, my angle of force is this way. And so I'm trying to push it this way. So my angle of force is going this way on it. And that just doesn't make much sense until you actually have the ability to use it. Once you understand the ability that anything you do with the bevel down, you can also, anything you do with the bevel up, you can do with the bevel down. It just takes more skill to run it this way. Suddenly everything becomes a little more flexible. And that's why almost all gouges have the bevel on the outside, because anything I would do with the bevel on the inside, I can also do with the bevel on the outside, and I can make that exact same cut. And so this becomes far more flexible. It's one chisel that can do two things, as opposed to having an incanel gouge where there's just some things you can't do with it. If you're reaching down into a hole and you're carving out a hole, you need that bevel to be on the outside so that you can ride the bevel around the curve. If the bevel's on the inside, you can't ride around the curve. It just wants to dive in more. Because if you're pushing it forward with the bevel on the outside, the chisel can only dive down. It can't dive up because it has this surface against it. Whereas if I have the bevel down, now I can go up or I can go down. I can push this any way because the waist is on this side and the cutting surface is down here and out of the way. So with having the bevel on the bottom, I get far more control. I can actually steer it and I can change the angle in the cut. And so that's the big difference between those. And I've had to say this in the past is I use the term hand tool mindset versus power tool mindset. And that's not saying that one is better than the other. It's just a different way of thinking through things. And there are very few people who have a pure hand tool mindset. I still think a lot of things through in the power tool world because I was raised on power tools. I have spent more time working with power tools than I have with hand tools. And so I still have a lot of that there are some things that become far easier because you can use the skill that you learn, but until you have that skill, you can't do it, such as the bevel up versus bevel down. It's very hard to push a chisel on an angle like this. It takes a skill to do that, and until you learn that skill, it's a useless thing to do, and so therefore having it bevel down just makes more sense. But yeah. Hey, we got another super chat.
Yes. So Flyfishinchief has a question.
Butt chisels and firmer chisels. Yes.
Buns of steel?
Do you have a mom joke ready, or should I?
Go ahead and answer the question.
Butt chisels. I don't actually have any butt chisels. Oh, yes, I do have a butt chisel. It's actually a bench chisel that is turned into a butt chisel. A butt chisel is basically a short bench chisel. Generally, it's a bit wider. It's shorter, and so you can see, regular bench chisel, butt chisel is shorter, and sometimes they're only like inch or two long. It isn't for reaching into things. It's just for cleaning up wide surfaces, and you tend to have them a good bit wider. So if I have this chisel 1.5 inches, this will do a wide area, but it's a little bit more ornery to use because I have a long handle. If my handle is up there closer, I get more control for paring out things if I'm only working with this space rather than working with all of it. So butt chisels really don't have a huge use, but if you do a lot of wide, short depth paring, they can be very useful for that. And they're easier to control because you don't have as long of a chisel, but you still have that full handle, so you have the full handle strength. Firmer chisels, okay, I have to say all the terms I've been using are very gray. Lots of things. You used to talk about a dovetail chisel, you could refer to half the chisels I've referred to here. Firmer chisel is basically any strong chisel. Firmer chisels tend to be a bit thicker. They're not quite as thick as a mortising chisel, though some people will refer to a mortising chisel as a firmer chisel. So you have to be careful when you talk to some people about that. But they tend to be thicker. They tend to be a little more stout, but they are of the same size. Also, they don't have the tapered sides. They usually are perfectly flat, like this carving chisel. There are people who will refer to this carving chisel as a firmer chisel because it has perfectly flat sides. Some people, that is the main characteristic, is having a flat side rather than having it come to a taper like that. Most firming chisels are flat. They're thicker, they're stout, so basically they're a strong bench chisel that you can pound on a good bit more without causing problem. And so, all chisels come across that, how durable are they? And usually the more force you want to put into it, the higher the angle you want on the blade. And the less force you're going to be putting out, the more control, such as your carving chisel, you want to put a lower angle on it. Also, the lower angle usually means a thinner piece of steel, so it's easier to move around. More force, bigger, higher angles usually mean thicker, beefier steel that you can get a lot more force into. So there's in every case, there's a broad continuum of at what point is something a firmer chisel, a butt chisel, a bench chisel. You could have a firmer bench butt chisel.
What kind of picture?
I need a shirt with that. I've got a firmer bench butt chisel.
That sounds like an infomercial ad.
It's a firmer chisel. It's a butt. It even makes
Do
Julian
you
fries.
suffer from? Don't worry, Tom's. Ooh, I'm throwing my phone. Tom's giving all sorts of jokes.
Yeah, and so names are names, and usually they're referring to a vague category that kind of tapers out on either end, and there's lots of overlap between them. So just saying that this is a mortising chisel and nothing else, well, yeah, there's a lot of other things it could be too. I could play darts with this. Hey, look at that.
Not with your aim.
Truth.
I should warn the knights if you ever go out.
So what's the next question?
We got a
mom joke. Hey, what's the mom joke?
Do you know what the gender neutral term for sugar daddy is?
What?
Glucose guardian. I like saying anything with guardian because of James's love for Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, I've got a picture of the Milano I want to make a frame for eventually. All right, what's next?
That's a fantastic question. So, I know you answered this once, and I don't know if maybe putting this on the hive mind or something would be good, unless you have a video. I'm sure you've made one about best starter kits with chisels. So I don't know.
When you're talking about bench chisels, get a set with 4 chisels. It really depends on the money you have. If you don't have much money, go to Harbor Freight and get their wooden handle set. Here we are. They're not great chisels. They're pretty junky, but they'll do the work, and they will teach you all the skills you need. You're going to have to sharpen them more often, but that's okay. Sharpening more often means you get to learn faster. But for $7, you get 6 chisels, and they will treat you very well until you get into it and you start to feel, I really want this in a chisel. From that point on, it's very personal. Everyone is going to tell you this chisel is better than that chisel, or this steel is better than that. Honestly, the steel in the chisel is the last thing you should focus on. Think about the handle. How comfortable is the handle? What handle shape do you like? Do you want a socket? Do you want a tang? How is the balance? What are you looking for in that? There are just so many different things that come into it that are far more important than the steel and how often you have to sharpen it. Because the difference between the absolute best steel and a medium okay steel is really not that much. So if you're strapped for money, go get a cheap set and you'll learn fine. My preference, what I tell most people is the Narek Richters. For the money, you really can't beat these. And all the tests that I've done, and if you want to see that, I have a whole series that I did on chisel tests. The steel on these was the best by far over all the steels tested. They're an incredible chisel, and they feel phenomenal. So that if money isn't too much of a thing, that's it. And in all comparison, at like $30 a piece, I think there's $35 a piece. It's really not that bad when you start looking at some chisels that are $100 a piece. That's a great deal for it. But if you're talking about carving sets, File has let me show you. They're the ones that say Swiss made. They're octagonal like this. They have a set of 6 that I really like. It comes with a V-tool. It comes with a skew. It comes with a veiner and then a couple gouges of different sizes. And they actually make it where you can get different gouges. A small set like that, it's like $200 for 6 chisels, which is pretty expensive. But they are the top line, the best chisels. And in most cases, I generally say, if you can swing it, get the good chisel, get the good carving chisels right off the bat. Don't get the cheap ones. There are some, and I did a video on these Narex. They're a folded steel or a bent steel. They're really darn cheap, and you can pick these up for. Actually, I can't remember what the price is. I want to say it was like $35 for a set of 6, and they have a gouge, a V-tool, a skew, a veiner, and then a wide gouge. And these will get you going. You're going to have to sharpen them. They do not come sharp. They come shaped, but they don't come sharp. And so that'll teach you how to sharpen them. But they're dirt cheap for the price. And if you want to see I have a video on that, there's another company I've been wanting to get. I can't remember the name of it. But they're like $15 a chisel. And I've heard some really good things about them. And I've been wanting to get a set and play with them. But in most cases, don't get the cheap ones unless you've talked to people and say, yes, those are good. Because Harbor Freight makes a set that they call carving chisels. There's not a single carving chisel in that set. They're actually scrapers that someone thought, oh, those look like carving chisels, and they've been selling them as a set of carving chisels. They are worthless trash in the absolute best sense. They're trash. Don't buy the Harbor Freight carving set or anything that looks like the Harbor Freight carving set. Actually, do I have some here to show? I do. Ha, good. Here, let me grab this. This thing, and this is just hilarious. If you ever see a set of chisels with a handle that looks like this, they've got this ferrule here, they've got this ferrule here, and they're usually painted, do not buy these. They are trash. Like this one. That's not a carving chisel. That would be like an incanel gouge without the gouge. It's just, that's a scraper. It's actually designed for scraping machine work. It's not a chisel. Don't buy that set. Sorry, I'll get off that. What's next? And I know I'll get the question about the tool row. I do have a video of making this from years ago. Made it with a side of beef. I've got 2 of them now, but this is the one that I use most of the time.
So James Crandall asks, if I am working on a post and beam project, do I need to invest in timber framing chisels, or could I use my larger bench chisels?
Yeah, use the larger bench chisels. For the pergola that I did, 90% of what I did was with this big 1.5" bench chisel. And I used the 1.5" as opposed to the inch because I had the 1.5". Having a big chisel just makes it easier. As long as it is, as long as the chisel is deep enough to reach into what you need, yeah, go ahead and use it. There's no reason to go get a slick, because one of these that needs a lot of work is usually around $60 to $70. So they're not cheap, and you're really not going to find much use for it after that. But it is nice when you got it. So. Yeah, actually, $67, that one needs a lot of work. Usually you're going to see them upwards around like 120 plus. And sharpened and ready to go, 200. What's next?
I'm trying to find things that some of these questions you might just have to send you. Oh, we're at 8:44. Okay, hang on.
I can smell the smoke.
Next live, we're going to do it 5:30 in the morning and see how well James does.
Europe would like that.
You are a brat. All right, we'll go to Aaron's follow-up question about the IBC chisel. So Aaron wants to know, if I buy one and send it to you, could you test it and send it back to him?
Yes. If I do that, I want to actually get a few of them rather than just testing one, because it takes a good bit of time to set up the system and actually do the test. I do still have the rig and all the testing, and I can do it the exact same way. But yeah, if you have one, great. I would actually like to test a couple others, so let me see if I can get a hands on some of the other ones. So if people have chisels they'd be willing to let me to loan to me, I'd be glad to put them through the test. What's next?
All right, Tiny Woodshop wants to know, can any chisel be a paring chisel?
Yeah, if you pair with it, it's a paring chisel. You don't, you can pair with the bench chisel. A paring chisel is just designed for deeper paring. It's a little bit more of a delicate chisel. Usually has a little lower angle, but there's nothing saying you can't pair with a bench chisel or a butt chisel. I mean, a butt chisel is also intended for paring, but it's intended for paring things that aren't quite as deep. So, what's next?
Let's see. Dr. Khan says, what are some interesting antique/vintage chisels you have?
I don't have a lot of antiques. That's one of the points at which antiques usually cost about the same price as a new one. So I haven't really needed to go get them. Yeah, other than the mortising chisels, I tend to find those cheaper. Like this one, this is an 1/8 inch mortising chisel. I picked that up for $1. And I love this one because it actually has this leather ring around here. And so it's a leather ring, a lot like a collar. I've never actually used it, but it's kind of cool. And I haven't found anything on it. There's no name or any markings. Just an interesting, cool chisel. But I don't do a lot of antiques. If you go and look at Rex's, Rex actually has a video looking at how to find cheap, good quality antiques. They are relatively easy to find on eBay. You can usually pick them up for, $10-15 ish, but then you got to add on shipping, and so you add on $10 to it. You're looking at $25 when you can go pick up one of these for $30-35. Just my personal opinion on that. But yeah, that's why I don't have a lot of antiques, except for the carving chisels. I do have a few of the carving chisels. None of those are anything particular because there are so many different brands and types of carving chisel. What's next?
Let's see. Alex asked, is sharpening... Okay, this question doesn't make sense. Alex, you might have to send a follow-up. Asking something with spoon hooks, or the hook should go to the stone from time to time. I don't know. I don't know if he's asking if you sharpen them the same. Spoon hooks? I don't know.
Spoon making hook knives. Yeah, I try to keep those where I just put them on the strop. I try not to take them back to the stone unless I forget and I go too long and they get too dull, and then I have to take them back to the stone, in which case I usually only take them back to my finest stone and then onto the strop. So yes, whenever I'm spoon carving or any type of carving, I have a strop with me, and I literally just keep a piece of leather, horse butt, and I'll keep it on my bench, and I can strop straight on that. I don't have any backing plate for it or anything like that. I just keep it on there, and that allows me to then bend this around my finger, and I can shape it to the gouge that I'm working on, or I can use the edge of it to do the inside of a V-tool. It's a very flexible piece that I can put wherever I want, and I do the exact same thing with the spoon carving hook knives. So, what's next?
Okay. Apparently, yes, that's what Alex wanted.
Glad
let's see.
Yeah, I'm hoping I've got rubber flooring coming, so you won't be hearing this too much longer.
Yes, I'm sure you're doing it for them more than anybody else. Our children will
So I
regret
can
it.
sneak up on the kids. They hear the clogs going towards the door, and they think, "Oh, it's time to get back to schoolwork."
Let's see. Perez Hernandez asked, "How long is your carving mallet?" I'm making one by hand. I'm not sure about the length yet.
I have a couple of them. Let me get my two that I use the most commonly. A carving mallet. Actually, I've used this one a couple of times. But, the carving mallet isn't held by the handle. You don't hold it by the handle and hit things like you do with a joiner's mallet. You actually hold the head. So a lot of carving mallets are just a chunk or a rock you can hold on this. I like to have a bit of weight back here. It tends to balance that out a bit more. But I use this one as well with a brass. This is a shop fox. And it's a relatively large piece of brass. And I'll hold this just up like that. Tap, 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 tap. So it doesn't need to be much. It's really only, this is probably only about 8 inches long. But yeah, this is live oak. Beautiful piece. I love live oak. So yeah, they are very, very short. This one is 4.5 inches long. They're intended you hold the head, not the handle. What's next? Thump and whacker.
So I'm going to ask, I'm jumping to Troy's question. It just came up because I'm intrigued to hear your answer about this. Troy's wondering about the June MWTCA meet. He says, so 1 block from my office, and it'd be great if we weren't working from home. Have you heard any more about that?
No.
Okay.
We probably won't until the month before. So we'll see. Yeah, the one that I usually help the running here, we canceled that one. It's in April. So we already canceled that one.
Oh, yeah.
Haven't had that 2 years because we canceled that. That was one of the first ones to cancel last year. So I haven't been to one in over a year now. There are a few who have been doing outdoor, which I would love to go do, but yeah, outdoor here doesn't work right now.
No.
Our yard has 1.5 feet of snow in it right now.
June's kind of iffy. July would be.
Yeah, we'll see.
Guess we'll just have to host
Especially the
our
tailgate
own.
ones, that'll be no problem.
Tailgate.
What's next?
All right. So Patrick Jordan asked, so all in all, how much have you spent on chisels? My wife is asking.
I don't know if I can answer that with my wife in the shop.
Oh, please.
Yeah, I made the mistake of buying the 2 cherries set. And I want to say it was like $350. And I've probably only used half of them. And that's why I tell people don't buy the big set, because I bought a set of 12. You generally don't need the big set because the chances of you needing that particular shaped gouge are so rare that, you know. Let's see, that was about $350-ish, I'm thinking. The Richters were, what, $200? And then
Together?
What's that?
Together?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's good. Most of the other chisels I've been, you know, like the pig sticker was $5-10. This one was probably the most expensive the Stanley ever asked. I paid $25 for that one. Most of my other chisels were much cheaper than that. Oh, this one was, I want to say $65. Bought this one at the MWTCA Peach Meat.
But if you take the price of your chisel, I'm going to sell this for you now. If you take the price you've spent on chisels and tools in general, I have gotten a new bed frame. I have gotten a new dresser. I have gotten a coffee table. I have gotten an amazing dining room table. 2 desks.
Drawers, cabinets.
Yeah, like
The floor
for what
upstairs.
we would have spent in a store.
That's how you sell things to your wife. Hey, babe, if you want the dining room table, You need the...
You mean it only took a year?
Is that a super from
It
Tom?
was a super from Tom. He wants a Renfest. And he says, what about a virtual and after that a formal meetup for Wood by Wright too? But having tool withdrawal hugs wouldn't join point.
I am really looking forward to doing the Wood by Wright Renfest. We'll maybe this fall. I do it at the fire pit and have some fun with it. For those of you who don't know, we're planning on doing a Wood by Wright meetup and invite people in and maybe do a hangout and cook in the fire and that type of thing. So we'll have a good time.
Maybe this summer. If things continue the way they're continuing.
It's going right. So what's his mom joke?
Do you know who my role model is?
Who?
The Pillsbury Doughboy.
Ah. That's mine too.
Oh, y'all, James made some amazing Irish soda bread biscuits in our air fryer tonight. Yum. That's all
Too
I'm
bad
gonna
I
say.
forgot the recipe.
You did? No. No, they were mwah, yummy. That was supper.
What's next?
All right. La, 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 la. Trying to catch up reading on the chat. Let's see. Alan Marshall asks, have you used any flexcut chisels?
FlexCut. Oh, no, I've never used their chisels. I've used their knives, but I've never used their chisels. That might be an interesting one to test. Yeah, the knives are a really good bang for the buck. I like them for that. I'm not a huge fan of the shape. It's supposed to be more ergonomic, and I just don't find it fits my hand that well, but they're decent knives. What's next?
Okay. So I think I'm to the not so much. Oh, wait, hang on.
What? Oh,
There's some questions that popped up. I was trying to stick with chisel questions. There's a couple non-chisel questions that I have. Let's see. Tom Leurquin asked, how much easier would a mortising chisel make the job versus a bench chisel?
in all honesty, not that much. If the mortise is big enough to need a mortising chisel, I usually drill out the waste. And that makes the rest of it, a bench chisel, is perfectly fine. If it's smaller than that, then I'm probably talking about something 1/4 inch. And that's why my only real mortising chisel is 1/4 inch. Because it's that halfway in between. If it's smaller than this, I'm just using a bench chisel. If it's bigger than this, I'm drilling it out. And so, do you need it? No. It makes it nicer because I can really hit this thing. I mean, I can whale on this with all I've got, and I'm not going to be hurting the chisel. With the bench chisel, you just have to be a little more careful with it. And there really is no reason to be whaling on it with all you've got. It's only going to go in so far. And if you're hitting it farther, you're just going to be driving it in and making it harder to pull out. So there's no real reason to be banging on it. Paul Sellers, he advocates that you really don't need mortising chisels at all. Bench chisels do the work perfectly fine. That's what he uses for all of his mortises. And it's actually really, really rare that I pull out a mortising chisel. So is it needed? No, not at all. What's next?
Andrew Seymour just asked, how effective is the pask makes method of making small gouges?
I'm going to have to look up that video. I think I remember, but I don't remember how it was done. I'll have to look that up.
Okay.
So sorry, I can't answer that question. But if he's doing it and he says it's good, I trust him. He does good work. Okay, time for one more?
Okay, so Kenny and Janet Horn had asked this question way back in the beginning. It's a wood identification question. I have a domestic hardwood, fine grain like maple, but more brown than maple. Pretty hard, but here's the kicker. When you cut it, it smells like cow manure. Any idea on what it is?
Elm.
There you go.
Yeah, there's a reason elm has a couple nicknames. Yeah, pretty good chance. If that's the smell, it's elm. That fits the category.
There
It could be 100 other things, but that's one of the things that Elm is known for. And it's got some very descriptive nicknames that fit that scent. So yeah, I think that'll do it for this week. Next week, we're actually going to be I'm going to do a talk through of planes. And so we're going to be talking through basically what we did here with all the different types of planes. Because the Fox Valley Woodworkers, they're a local group about halfway between me and Chicago. They're doing their local club meeting, and they wanted me to come in and talk to them. They've been asking me to come in for a while, and then COVID hit, and so now they're doing all their meetings online, but the problem is they do them on Tuesday nights. So it's whenever I do my live. So we worked out a thing where I'm actually going to do the live for them. So everyone can watch. But I'll be answering questions and talking to them, so I won't be taking questions from the audience as much. So it'll be an interesting talk through. It'll be kind of fun to see how we do that.
Wow, I'm glad I got a heads up on that too.
I didn't tell you about that?
No.
So it'll be a little easier for Sarah. So she'll be able to just hit work in the chat, so you guys can talk behind my back without it, and she can focus on that.
Alan, you were worried about the children. There they are.
So that'll be a little bit different. We're looking forward to trying that out. But yeah, we'll talk about hand planes and basically all planes. What are the different types? Because it'll be interesting because this is the Fox Valley Woodworkers are your average garage woodworker that's all power tools. So a lot of them don't use any planes at all. So it'll be very fun to actually go through it from that point of view. So
that's not the same place you went and talked about your lathe, is it?
No, that was that was up in La Crosse. Well, there's like 5 places I've taken the lathe to. The one I went with you was in La Crosse.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't remember exactly where Fox Valley is.
About halfway between here and Chicago.
Oh, then where am I thinking of in Wisconsin?
I don't know.
Isn't there a Fox Valley in Wisconsin?
There's a Fox Valley all over the place.
I know.
There's a Fox Valley in Pennsylvania. So on that note, I think that'll about do it. This will be a fun time. And if you do have any questions that I didn't get to, feel free to send me a message. I do answer as many of those as I possibly can. Even if it's at like midnight and I'm sitting on my phone and Sarah's trying to get me to go to sleep. I'll still be answering.
He just doesn't want to tell you the truth that I'm snoring, which I don't. But,
So until next time, have a wonderful day.